Hi, welcome back to Missy's Enchanted Channel. Well, we are working on Series 5 of True Tales of Ghostly Encounters. So we're getting there, guys. All right. All right, the first one that we're going to read today is A Comfort. I was 13 when my grandmother, Minnie McClendon, died in 1952. I loved her dearly and was grief-stricken by her sudden death. My parents, Donald and Jessie McClendon, and I traveled to Moraine, Texas for the funeral. While there, I sometimes thought I heard my grandmother's voice calling me from the kitchen in her familiar way. Honey, come on out in the kitchen with me. Each time, I almost answered before remembering she was dead. Then I would break into sobs. Through some confusion, I didn't get to sit with my parents next to grandmother's casket at the funeral, and I resented this. The following day, we returned home to Eastland, Texas. I was very tired. That night in bed, I was about to drop off to sleep, but when I rolled over on my side, facing the window, I bolted wide awake. There stood grandmother beside my bed in her light blue funeral gown, her long hair hanging loosely about her shoulders. I was so startled I hid my face. When I looked again, she was gone. Now, years later, I often wonder if grandmother came to comfort me because of my grief and disappointment at not getting to sit next to her casket. Well, that's something to think about. I mean, I think, people who passed and everything, they do try to find ways to comfort you. And that to me is actually believable. Let me know what you think. It's Beverly Hutchinson, Tijeras, New Mexico, April 1974. All right, now we're going to be moving on to The Shining Form. In 1962, my father, Glenn Henderson, died of leukemia in a small hospital in Pecos, Texas. In his last hours of life, my mother and I reassured him of our love. While in a coma, he had been calling my mother's name for over 3 hours. When he fell silent and the doctor pronounced him dead, it was almost a relief. The doctor was accompanied by a nurse and an assistant. Father's bed had been raised to a sitting position so that he could breathe more easily. The nurse later returned the bed to the prone position. I told her that I had heard music the entire time. She assured me that no music was playing at that hour, which was shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning. My mother slumped into my arms as we sat on a settee nearby. Suddenly, the nurse said to the doctor, "Do you see it?" We looked up and saw a small figure above my father's prone body, shining as though wrapped in silver foil. It was in a sitting position with knees bent and arms outstretched. It was joined to my father's body by a silver cord. We could see the window across from the bed through the rising form. All was gone in less than a minute. While not a religious man, my father was a spiritual one. Of course, my mother and I saw it could be explained as an illusion due to our emotional states, but a doctor and 2 nurses also witnessed the event. They certainly were removed from this happening emotionally, having been in contact with my father for less than 24 hours. The nurse later said it was the second time she had witnessed such an event. It has been a great comfort to mother and me through all the following years. The experience confirmed our belief that we live on after death. My father was a strong and loving man who would give us proof of that if he could. And that's Robert C. Henderson, Land O'Lakes, Florida, March 1989. That's interesting. Like I said, they try to let you know that they're there. And I do believe life after death. All right, the comeback. During my senior year in college, my father, Charles Sawyer, died on his way home from his midnight to 8 job. His fatal heart attack in December 1971 did not really surprise my mother, Elizabeth, and me. Dad had refused to see any doctor after our family physician had warned him 5 years earlier that his days were numbered if he persisted in chain smoking and drinking his daily quart or 2 of beer. Once the first frenzied days of bereavement had passed, my mother returned to work and I to school. We grappled with feelings of grief and loss, but we did not cling to this tragedy. We went on with our lives. Then, in March 1972, I awakened a few hours before dawn in terror, shivering uncontrollably, my heart pounding. Although I was in the dark, I knew that someone was standing near my bed. I could feel a presence. Just as suddenly as I realized a man was in the room, I knew it was my father. I chided myself. Absurd, I thought. The dead make house calls only in Halloween stories. With all the courage I could summon, I peeked from under my down comforter and switched on the nightlight. No one was in the room. I dismissed the incident as a subconscious rebellion against the stoicism with which I had accepted my father's death. The experience proved I was human after all. As I dressed the next morning, I resolved not to say anything to my mother, even if I related the incident in a joking manner. I feared it would upset her. Yet it had been so vivid that I had to struggle the resisted blurting out of the tale at breakfast. I needed not have concerned myself. Don't laugh, Mother said, but the strangest thing happened to me last night. I woke up about 3 a.m. and could have sworn your father was standing beside my bed. When I finally found the courage to turn on the light, he wasn't there. As if trying to convince herself, she continued, "Of course he wasn't. How silly to let my nerves shake me up so." I believe my father did visit us both that night. He had not had an opportunity to say farewell. I think he came back to do just that. Eileen Sawyer, Richmond Hill, New York, October 1984. I believe he came to say goodbye to them. Yes, I really do. I think he just wanted to let them know that he was fine and everything. So I do believe he showed up to say goodbye. All right, now we move on to Father Martin's message. On a crisp October morning in 1964, we received word of the death in a highway accident of a young friend, Father Martin. He had been assistant to the pastor at the church near our home in Richmond Heights, Missouri. He had fallen asleep at the wheel of his car and crashed head-on into a huge tractor-trailer rig. He was dead when the highway patrolman arrived. His body was brought back to his church, where he lay in state for several days while stricken parishioners filed past the casket to pay their final homage. My family and I were among the mourners. Although I am not a Catholic, Father Martin had been a good friend with whom I had spent many pleasant hours discussing the Bible, theology, and the hereafter. We often discussed whether the Jewish people in biblical times had believed in life after death, or if this piece is particularly to Christian teachings. Early in the afternoon before his funeral on November 8, 1964, we visited the church once more. As I knelt before the casket, I wonder, had Father now learned the answers to all the questions we had been asking? About 3:15 that afternoon, having returned from a shopping trip, I started downstairs to the laundry room. Suddenly and inexplicably, I felt someone or something close behind me. An ice-cold surge of terror paralyzed my body. I couldn't move. All I could see was a mist, but the mist formed a human outline. It was Father Martin. His distinctive face, light hair, and slim form. Although it seemed longer, the experience lasted little more than a few moments. The mist dissolved and my paralysis lifted. Now, years later, I am certain of what happened that autumn afternoon, and I know what it meant. Father Martin and I had talked many times of ghostly visitations during the first days after death. In a most convincing manner, he had given me definite proof of survival beyond physical death. And that's Beverly C. Jaggers, Richard Heights, Missouri, July 1971. Interesting. So he did get back to her. All right, grandfathers came. When I was growing up, my grandfather, Victor White, lived in a small town of Marlin, Texas, 10 miles from our home in Regan. He died from complications of a stroke when I was 12 years old. He had been partially paralyzed and walked with a cane. About 1 week after his death in May 1953, I was sitting on the couch in our living room when I heard footsteps coming up the sidewalk. My grandfather had walked in a characteristic way. He would take a step and then drag the other foot. These were the exact sounds that I heard as I sat on the couch. Although I didn't realize that I was hearing grandfather's footsteps, Knowing that beggars would occasionally come to the house asking for food, I thought at first it was one of them. When I went outside to look, I saw no footprints in the dirt that covered part of the sidewalk. But leaning against the steps of the porch was my grandfather's walking cane. To this day, no one knows how that cane made its way to our house, 10 miles from Marlin to Regan. Now that one's really interesting. I think that would give me goosebumps, an object just suddenly appearing and it couldn't get there by its own. And it was 10 miles away. Yeah, that would kind of get me a little bit. Jill Rapp, Bryan, Texas, August 1987. All right, I'm going to read one more. The Visitor. My husband spent the last 2 months of his life in a private room in the Kelowna Hospital in Kelowna, British Columbia. It was late 1965 and he was dying of cancer. I spent all my days at his bedside, leaving only once in a while to pick up our mail or get books from the library. One afternoon when I returned after an absence of about 2 hours, he greeted me excitedly. Guess who came to visit while you were gone? Lou Gunn. That's odd, I thought. Lou lives in Edmonton and doesn't even know my husband is ill. Lou had been his closest friend during the many years we had lived in Edmonton. How did he know you were in the hospital? I asked. I don't know, he just did, came the vague answer. I looked closely to see if my husband had been influenced by some drug. His eyes looked perfectly normal and clear. Lou had a very serious heart attack, my husband continued. On November 2nd, out of the blue, he was stricken with a coronary thrombosis. November 2nd, this was November 28th. If Lou had sustained a serious coronary only 6 days ago, he could not possibly have traveled the distance to Kelowna. Are you sure Lou was here? Maybe you went to sleep and dreamed while I was gone. My husband, now indignant, replied, I haven't slept 1 minute. Lou was here and he talked to me. Why don't you ask the nurse? She'll know. All visitors had to have the nurse's permission to enter my husband's room. I went to the desk and asked if he had any visitors. The answer was no. Had he been given any medication? Nothing whatsoever for the past 3 days. Back in his room, I told him that he had dreamed Lou's visit. He became quite angry and insisted it was not a dream. 4 weeks later, I received a letter from Lou's wife telling me that his heart attack on November 2nd, 1965 had been fatal. He died within an hour of the attack. But my husband insisted he saw Lou 26 days later. Well, we all know that he probably came and visited him. Anne Irvin, Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, September 1967. But that was interesting. I love these stories because they're really interesting and, it shows you that, things can happen after you die and everything. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think. Do you believe in life after death? Do you believe reincarnation? Anything to that effect? Do you believe in ghosts, paranormal? Oh, so many unanswered questions in this world. But let me know, and let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. Hope you guys have a nice night or a day. I don't know what it is over there right now for you guys. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye, everyone. Stay safe and have fun. And I hope you enjoyed. Give it a thumbs up. Thank you. Mwah. Bye.